challenge the notion of creativity ever can be this simple. I would challenge the notion of creativity ever was this simple. Rather, I would say that creativity is always already imbued with a set of problems that we need to address if we actually want to develop this debate beyond this single causality. We all know creativity is not necessarily a good thing. Reading, for instance, the debates about torture at Guantanamo, we are presented with a plethora of creative ways to interrogate, torture, and otherwise punish people. Michel Foucault, in Surveiller de Nil, presents us with another, almost a phantasmagoria of creative ways to truly try to crush the human spirit. We are seeing more and more creative wars, with terrorism as possibly the most creative act of all, which we might morally abhor, but wherein we still can see a great measure of creative problem solving, intelligent planning, and so on. Creativity, the simple word, cannot just be allowed to be this simple. The other notion that creativity would somehow always already be connected to freedom is of course also a very odd notion. If we look back at the Renaissance, clearly few people were less free than the creative ones. They were completely and utterly the property of those who sponsored them. Minstrels in the medieval age were basically beyond the law. They could be killed at will. And if we look at our own culture, for instance, I've always enjoyed when people refer to Hollywood as a hotbed of creativity. The golden years of Hollywood were basically a feudal system where people in contracts, which today would be likened to slavery, together banded up to create some of the greatest movies of all times. Microsoft, which at least sells itself as one of the most innovative companies in the world, is known for its harsh and controlling management techniques. Creativity can be shackled and managed. Creativity can even be efficient when shackled and managed. And we cannot just turn a blind eye to this. Creativity can be unproductive. Think about the wondrous era of the .com boom. And creativity is in part what we want it to be, what we want it to create this as in our discussions. Also, talking about creativity, I believe it's important to bring up problems and discontents. We are often assuming that our very westernized notion of creativity, linked back to the notion of the romantic genius, is the universal mode. If we talk about the global race of creativity, we have to go beyond our westernized notions and, for instance, accept that Chinese creativity is something very, very different. In a Confucian society, which I would claim China still is, the notion of the solitary romantic genius as a creative node is not the same as ours. Their creativity can be shackled without even challenging the discursive regime. Is the popularity which follows that is creating a notion of creative ghettos? I've always been astounded by the fact that if you actually read Richard Florida's thesis, he's basically claiming that one should create gay areas in cities, areas which would try to attract primarily homosexual people. This is, of course, an old fascist idea of trying to separate the city into controllable units, but still has been accepted because it's sold under the notion of creativity as a simple and very nice structure. Also, going to my other hometown, Stockholm, if you go to Sofo, south of Folkungagatan, you also see the notion that this would be the creative hotspot, the area where creatives behave as creatives are always supposed to do, dressed in black and drinking coffee. And I believe that these caricatures, these ideological notions, are also something we need challenging. I'll skip that. So, challenges, which I wanted to throw out to give my esteemed co-presenters something to play off on. What comes after creativity? What comes after the simplified notion that creativity is just one thing? And I know Olli will address this specifically in seeing variations of creativity. What is really the creative region or the creative city? If you look at how the cities today, Western cities and Eastern cities, are reimagined, we are seeing a veritable explosion, new thinking in city planning, so that the Asian aerotropolises, which are basically cities building up, constructed around great new airports, recast the notion of the city. The ring cities, the notion that maybe the urban centre is something we should avoid. Maybe the urban centre never was meant as a creative spot. Maybe creativity actually exists in the suburbs, in the ring areas. In Stockholm there have been debates about turning Telefonplan, which is actually a rather dull area. I've lived there for enough time to actually state this, into the creative hotspot, turning creativity away from the urban city centres. And also, how do we go beyond the Western archetypes of creativity? Chinese creativity, Indian creativity, and so on. And then, creativity is the solution. What really is the problem? What was the problem all along? I wanted to throw out these provocative, possibly gravely mistaken ideas at this group, because I know that the speakers coming after me all have their own creative solutions to existing problems. And I believe that the challenge for us is to actually go and look beyond the surface effects of creativity and see what happens when the ideological notions of creativity presented in academic theory and presented in simplified political statements actually meet the world. Actually meet the world with its friction, with its limitations, and with its various ways to pervert even the simplest system. I'm not calling out for a wholesale destruction or critique of the notion of creativity. That would be silly. What I'm calling for is going beyond simple dichotomies between creative and uncreative, simple dichotomies between winners and losers, and simplified notions about what it is creativity truly does in the world. If we want to debate on creativity, we need this debate too to be creative, and such debates will always contain at least a seed of destruction, at least a seed of something not quite common, something we're not quite used to. Creativity is challenging, and this specifically is its power. We have three speakers coming up who I'd like to introduce, who will get to introduce themselves. We begin with Tero-Pekka, who will talk about high creative project in this specific city and the challenges, problems, and potentials of this project. With Suvi, who will talk about the project of turning Turku into one of the cultural capitals. Also a project with both great problems and great potentialities. And at least Olli from the Future Studies Center will talk about variations of how this cultural economy can be viewed and try to take us beyond the notion that the creative economy would be just one thing and instead shows a plethora of variations of this. With this, I would like to thank you and turn you over to Tero-Pekka. We have the rules for this debate, is basically this. After each presentation, we'll have a little space for questions. And after all three presentations are run through, we'll try to tie these debates up into a somewhat semi-coherent statement. Thank you very much, and Tero-Pekka.